Hello, welcome back to more Bloodborne Chalice Dungeon expansion painting. We've painted 4 already and now we're on to the 5th one today, and we are turning our attention to the big boy, the Undead Giant, the two-handed, gross-looking Frankenstein beast with candles on his back. And to begin, we're starting off as we always do with 1 pot of water for our clean water, 1 pot of water for our dirty water. We're grabbing some kitchen roll for any spills and wiping off any excess paint from our brushes, and a wet palette, get it nice and soaked up on a horrible sponge that you definitely need to replace. Pop on a wet palette sheet, and to get rid of any crinkles, wrinkles or any kinks, just grab a card or anything with a thin flat surface and just iron it out. Then we're ready to paint, so we will grab our Undead Giant and we will prime him with some black, ready for a Zenithal highlight. To do said Zenithal highlight, we're going to grab a mat that we don't care if it gets dirty, grab an airbrush, grab some thinner and some cleaner, and we're ready to do some spraying. So I'm going to pop some thinner into the cup along with some Liquitex white ink. You can use any form of acrylic or anything similar if you want to, but I like to use ink because I like the way it flows from the airbrush. And from a top-down angle, just start spraying, making sure that the higher points of the model are the brightest, falling off into darker tones towards the bottom, and that the undersides are the darkest. Once we've got our highlighting done, we can begin painting. So I'm going to start off with some Basilicanum Grey, which is a really nice, muted, dull kind of grey tone, and I'll be painting that onto the sort of hood, shawl thing that is sitting on this giant. And because it's not too dark, it sits really nicely with the Zenithal highlight. Then for the main part of the body, I'm taking some Skeleton Horde contrast paint, typically used for skeletons and bones, but I find it works really well with this undead fleshy kind of look as well. And then once that's painted in, I can take some Bugman's Glow and I can paint these horrible sort of hanging intestines, innards that are sort of falling off of his torso. And then with that done, I can take some Corax White and I can paint in the candles. Painting them white allows us to mix in some other colours later on so they're not so boring. With those done, I can grab some metallic and I'll be using some Iron Warriors to do this, and I'll be painting it over the weapons and the sort of like gauntlets that are holding the weapons, and just doing a very light dry brush of this stuff over it. Oh, and I just dropped it. And just doing a very light dry brush of it so that we can build up extra metallic tones on top. Moving up into brighter metallic tones in Necron Compound, I'll just be targeting the upper areas and the edges of the weapons so that we generate some sort of shine and highlight on those parts. And to sort of grubby it up a bit, I'm going to grab some Rune Lord Brass, and I'm just going to sort of dab those around to create a sort of like rusty old metal kind of look. And just to accentuate that kind of rusty metal look, I'm going to grab some Fulgurite Copper, which is a very nice rich copper colour, put it on top of the Rune Lord Brass, and it will generate this really nice old worn kind of metal look. Then I'll take some Agrax Earthshade, which is a really nice sort of like browny, grimy shade, to add some dirt and grime into the body, and it'll just sink into all the nooks and crannies and creases and just give us some real dirt and contrast to it. Then I can grab some Seraphim Sepia, which can go onto the candles to give us a bit of sort of like old browny kind of shade to it. And then grab some Nuln Oil, which is everybody's favourite little cheat sheet. Pop it onto our weapons to give us some shine, gloss and contrast. And I'll also pop some Nuln Oil over the top of the hood as well, just to give us a bit of shade within the creases and crevices as well. With that done, we just need to let it dry, and then once dried, we can grab some Corax White and pop it onto the sort of tops of the wax on the candles, just to make them stand out from the muddied look on the rest of the candle. Then for our main sort of like body tone, I'm going to be using this Morghast Bone, which is a lovely sort of like bone colour, but it works really well with Skeleton Horde contrast paint, as it is the same sort of tone, but it's a lot brighter. So I'm just going to use it in all the sort of central parts of all the body parts, making sure I'm not painting over everything, but just sort of like, as you can see, the sort of like middle parts of everything, and just blending it out into the Skeleton Horde contrast paint, so you get that kind of nice gradient between the tones. Then within the centre of the Morghast Bone, I'm popping some Wraithbone, which is a much brighter version. It's not white, it's quite off-white, but it's bright enough that you can start adding a lot of highlight on top of the bone tone. and then we'll just slowly just start accentuating all these highlights that we are building up, and then just blending it between the darker tones. Then I can add some Corax White into the Wraithbone and just make sure that is the most central part of all the highlights and the most further out edges of all the highlights that we've made, so that you can see that there is a real strong flow between the Corax White Wraithbone right down through all the other bone tones, right through to the Skeleton Horde contrast on top of the Prime. Then I can grab some Eshin Grey, do the same sort of thing that I've been doing on the body, just using this as the sort of like mid-tone base colour, and then I can start working in some Corax White into those greys, just to start accentuating the sort of upper parts of the wrinkles and the edges and all the raised areas, so that we do get that nice gradient between the brighter parts to all the darker parts that sort of sit within the recesses of the fabric. Then when we've done that, we can grab some rat skin flesh, which is this really nice orangey fleshy kind of colour, and that will just go over the sort of middle parts of the hanging intestines. And then grab some Wordbearer's Red, which is a nice sort of like rich burgundy colour, and I'll use that as a kind of bloody tone, but also around the edges to give us a bit more shading and shadow within the reds. Now for the candles, I'll just grab some Avalon Sunset, which is a nice sort of like mid-yellow tone for the flames, then grab some Flash Glitz Yellow, which will be the sort of brighter tones to highlight the upper parts. And I wanted to do some sort of like flame reflection, but I didn't want to have to use the airbrush to do this, so I decided to try and just dry brush on some Longbeard Grey, which is a dry white paint, and then just very subtly start dry brushing on some yellow tones onto it. You could do it with glazing and everything like that, but for a kind of a quick fix, if you wanted to paint quite a few in this style, you can just dry brush on like I am doing now. It doesn't generate the best of looks, but it does generate a nice sort of like flame look nonetheless. And then once I've done that, I'm going to give another pass of the Fulgurite Copper onto the weapons, just to give us a bit more stronger rusty kind of colour. And then once I've done that, that's pretty much the Undead Giant done. And we can call it a day with this big mama. So thank you very much once again for joining me on another episode of Painting the Bloodborne board game expansions. If you did enjoy today's episode, please be sure to drop it a like, leave me a comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you want to support even further, you can head over to the Patreon. The link is in the description and on screen. But if not, I appreciate you sticking around and watching this video. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We've got a lot more Bloodborne content coming your way, so keep an eye out for that. And we'll see you in the next one. Toodaloo.